Good morning, everyone. So excited. We are at the end of week 8, which means that next week is our last week of lectures. So, it's really, really exciting because the term's coming to an end, which probably also means the exams are around the corner. But it's really exciting to be finishing the lecture series with you guys. So now I'm going to do a quick recap of what we did in the last lecture, which is on Tuesday. So I am going to quickly... Oh, sorry, that's not what I was going to... why was I doing that? That's what I was going to talk about. Now, as a quick summary, this is a really nice table as a quick summary for price discrimination, which I'm just quickly going to talk about as, first degree price discrimination. We talk about it as perfect price discrimination. The basis is on the individual willingness to pay. Second degree price discrimination, we describe that as menu pricing. We talk about the difference between quantity and quality. Third degree price discrimination is group pricing, which the basis is on observable group traits. How it differs between the price per unit with the first degree varies by the individual, because we take the individual's willingness to pay as a benchmark as to what we're going to make them pay. Second degree price discrimination varies by quantity or quality, whether you're flying business class or you're flying economy, or you're buying 100,000 units of something versus buying one. And in third degree price discrimination, I talked about an example such as Netflix and Spotify, where if you go to, they call them regional pricing, where if you go to certain developing countries, they are cheaper. Consumer surplus under first degree price discrimination is 0, because all the surplus goes to the producer. Based on second and third degree price discrimination, we do get some consumer surplus. Now, we then move on to talk about oligopoly, which is in chapter 8. And we did mention the market structure of an oligopoly features a small number of firms. We talked about examples being airlines, being banks, especially in Australia. Banks are a really good example of an oligopoly because we have ANZ, Westpac, NAB, Combank, Suncorp. I reckon we probably have maybe about 20. I could be wrong, but it's a relatively small number. We're not talking about thousands of firms in that one market. We also talked about how these small number of firms have strategic interactions, indicating that the actions of one firm has direct implications on the other firms and vice versa. And we also said that in making its own decision, a firm tries to anticipate what the other firms are about to do. And this is what we call game theory. And we're going to basically talk about game theory for all of the rest of this chapter, which we are going to finish today. Now, as we start off looking at game theory, we start off by defining what a dominant strategy is. A dominant strategy represents a strategy that is preferred by a player irrespective of the strategy selected by the other player. This is going to be a really, really important thing for you to know how to identify. And I will keep reminding you of the importance of understanding how to derive or determine a player's dominant strategy. A simultaneous game is defined as a type of game in which players move simultaneously or alternatively, and they're unaware of each other player's actions. So I was playing this game I was talking about this game with the students in the lectures that I was playing at home with my kids, and we had to count 1, 2, 3, and then we had to either sit or stand. That is a very, very simple simultaneous game and part of the explanation of dominant strategy, because my decision to stand had nothing to do with what I thought the kids were going to do. Next, before we talk about a simple entry game, because from there, I will come back to this, please do not worry. We talk about a prisoner's dilemma game. Now, before we talk about this, I'm sure I mentioned to you about Nash and the theory that Nash came up with. Maybe I didn't. Let me just see if I did. Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. Okay. So when we talk about the prisoner's dilemma game, one of the key things that has always been used is the concept of two suspects. Okay. So I started talking about the prisoner's dilemma game by showing you by showing you this concept where you have two suspects and came up with the name Will and Nay. And these two suspects were taken into two different rooms by the police and interrogated. Okay, they have two options. They can either cooperate, which means they stay silent, or they can defect, means that they confess. So in the best outcome that they could achieve was for both of them to stay silent, to cooperate. And in doing so, both of them will only get 1 year in prison. On the other hand, if Nay was to cooperate and Will was to confess, then Will will get no jail time, but Nay will get 10 years in jail. And vice versa, if Nay confesses and Will stays silent and cooperate, Will will get 10 years in jail and Nay will get no jail time. On the other hand, if both of them confess, both of them will get 5 years in jail. So we can see here that the best outcome is for Nay and Will to cooperate, to stay silent. However, that is not their dominant strategy. Their dominant strategy, as we could tell, when Nay cooperates, when we look at Nay cooperating, and we look at the options that Will has, Will either get no jail time or 1 year. Of course, no jail time is better. And so we've got 1 star to defect for Will. If Nay defects, and Will defects, Will get 5 years. If Nay defects and Will cooperates, Will get 10 years. So very clearly, if Nay defects, Will defecting will give him a better payoff. And therefore, we get the double star, which indicates that Will's dominant strategy is defecting. Let's then look at isolating Will's decision. If Will cooperates and Nay cooperates, Nay will get 1 year in jail versus 0. 0 is better than 1 year in jail, so Nay will defect. Let's say if Will decides that he is going to defect, if Nay defects as well, she gets 5 years. If Nay cooperates, she gets 10 years. And as a result, Nay will defect too. So the dominant strategy for both the suspects was to defect. This is a theory that was introduced by Nash. We'll talk a little bit more about Nash in a few moments. Let's go back to the slide. And we're going to talk about the simple entry game. I'm trying to find a slide with those numbers that isn't so colorful. Now, I'm sure you can follow me as a very quick recap. Facebook stay or Facebook exit, Facebook enter or Facebook do not enter. One of the key things that we talked about on Tuesday is the strategy profile. Each one of those 4 quadrants shows you or represents a strategy profile. Facebook is considering entering the market for social media, and Facebook is considering exiting the market for social media. Let's check the dominant strategy, because from here on, we need to be able to identify the dominant strategy of a player relatively quickly. In this scenario, we have 2 players, Facebook and Facebook. If we talk about Facebook staying, then Facebook entering will lose 20 billion and Facebook staying away will lose 0 billions. Therefore, we are going to stay away. If Facebook exits the market, Facebook entering will lose 10 billion and Facebook not entering will lose 0. And as a result, we will also not enter. On the contrary, we look at Facebook entry into the market. When Facebook enters the market, Facebook staying will make Facebook $8 billion, but Facebook exiting will make them 0, and therefore we are going to stay. If Facebook do not enter the market, Facebook staying will make them 10 billion, and Facebook exiting will make them 0 billion. Therefore, of course, we love the money, so we are going to stay. Clearly, in the 4 strategy profiles, we have shown that Facebook's dominant strategy is to stay, and Facebook dominant strategy is not to enter. That seems relatively straightforward. Let's look at the next prisoner dilemma game. Advertise or don't advertise? Let's look at their dominant strategy. Actually, didn't I have another? This one. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, go back. In the event that you cannot find a dominant strategy, for example, in this particular instance, we are going to look at Facebook and Facebook. In this particular instance, we say that if Facebook is staying, if Facebook is staying, then, never mind, clear enough for my liking. If Facebook is staying, then Facebook entry into the market will lose them 2 billion. No entry will lose them 0. So we are going to not enter. If, on the other hand, Facebook exits the market, Facebook entering the market will make them 10 million, and Facebook not entering will make them 0. And therefore, Facebook isn't going to enter the market. On the contrary, if Facebook enters the market, Facebook staying will make them 8 billion. Facebook exiting will make them 0. So we are going to stay. On the other hand, if Facebook do not enter the market and Facebook stays, then Facebook makes 10 billion. And if Facebook exits the market, they make 0. Therefore, Facebook is going to stay. If we have a scenario where the dominant strategy of one player, if there is no dominant strategy for one player, then what we do is we look to see if there is a dominant strategy for the other player. If there is, then basically what that means is that we're going to take the exit strategy, which we do not believe is going to happen, and we're going to cancel that out. In doing so, what we are then saying is Facebook is going to stay. But what is Facebook going to do? Facebook staying or entering will lose them 2 billion, and Facebook not entering will lose them 0. So very clearly, it has therefore been decided for us that Facebook will not enter the market. Let's then have a look at the next prisoner dilemma game. The next prisoner dilemma game talks about advertising between the banks. Now, in advertising between the banks, if you look at the strategy profiles, we can tell that if ANZ and NAB both do not advertise, that they will gain a higher payoff than if they both do advertise. So if they both do not advertise, they both get 100 million. 100 plus 100 is 200 million. If they both advertise, they will only get 140 million. So if ANZ decides not to advertise and NAB decide not to advertise, that's really the best outcome for both parties. The payoffs of $100 million are materializing because ANZ and NAB are saving money by not advertising. This is kind of a good outcome for both of them. We don't really want one party to advertise and the other not, because then we'll be stealing customer base from the other party and also stealing profits from the other party. So one company advertising and the other not is not a good outcome. It's not a good strategy profile. Now, if we both advertise, we assume that we're both using the same marketing company, we're both equally efficient, and as a result of that, the stealing of the customers and the stealing of it back cancels itself out. The difference between 100 million and 70 million is basically your marketing costs. Now, this situation is worse than the original one where they were not advertising, because now they have to pay for advertising costs. This is an example of where it had been better for ANZ and NAB to coordinate, collude, and decide not to advertise. That will give society the highest payoff. Let's see if that is what the game is going to predict. Let's see if who has dominant strategy. So let's first look at NAB. If NAB is advertising, ANZ advertising will give them 70 million. ANZ not advertising will give them 50. So 70 greater than 50. So we advertise. If NAB does not advertise, ANZ advertising will give them 120 versus ANZ not advertising will give them 100 million, and therefore 120 greater than 100 million, we advertise. Then we look at ANZ's profile. Let's say ANZ is advertising. If NAB advertise, NAB gets 70 million. If NAB doesn't advertise, NAB get 50 million. So 70 greater than 50. So we advertise. And finally, if ANZ do not advertise and NAB advertise, NAB will get 120 million, which is greater than 100 million. So NAB will advertise. Sorry. NAB will advertise. So basically what we are seeing is that there are two asterisks here for ANZ, the two asterisks here for advertising for NAB. Therefore, the dominant strategy for NAB is to advertise, and the dominant strategy for ANZ is also to advertise. What that means that it is optimal for ANZ to advertise both when NAB advertises and when they don't. That is true, vice versa. Now, we know that both players have dominant strategy. Therefore, we know the outcome is that they will play their dominant strategy. And this is what we call a prisoner dilemma game. Now, I can't actually remember if I told you to go and look. I think I did. John Nash, a mathematician and economist, developed the concept of Nash equilibrium, which we're going to talk about later on in today's lecture. He won a Nobel Prize in economics in 1994 for his work on non-cooperative games, something that we're looking at in this chapter of Oligopoly. A Nash equilibrium occurs when each player in the game chooses a strategy that is optimal given the strategies of all other players. Nobody has anything to gain by changing their own strategy unilaterally. So in a pricing game between two firms, if both firms chooses prices where neither can improve profits by changing their price alone, that is Nash equilibrium. Okay? I am going to talk about this in a lot more detail very, very shortly. Let's look back at this particular example and talk about Nash's point. Nash's point here is that this game, ANZ and NAB, suggests that ANZ and NAB are going after what is best for them. By trying to maximize their own individual payouts, they end up deciding to advertise. Definitely what we see in real life, because we can see a lot of banks advertising. But is this really socially optimal? The answer is no. Not advertising would have been better in this case because they would have saved the advertising cost. They could have coordinated to not advertise at all and save the money and have the same impact. The impact is the same in terms of the number of customers that you have, the number of clientele that you have. Excuse me. In this particular game, advertising is a wasteful activity that is not particularly helpful for anybody. However, there is a big tension. ANZ is like, if I don't advertise and NAB does, then I'll lose out. Clearly, we can see it. 120 minus 50 is 70. So you lose out by 70 million if you don't advertise and the other party does. Therefore, there is an incentive for both players to advertise, even though it is not socially optimal. Equilibrium from the game is that they do advertise. That's why advertising for both parties is not socially optimal. Therefore, it is not Pareto optimal. It is not. It is Pareto efficient at 100 for both parties because everybody is better off. Now, let's look at cartel game. This is a real world, cartel game is a real world example of the prisoner's dilemma in economics. A cartel represents private agreements aimed at increasing profit of the cartel members by reducing competition. We reduce competition by either controlling prices or preventing entry. An example of a cartel is OPEC. We also state that cartels are illegal nearly everywhere. It is also illegal in Saudi Arabia. Cartel members cannot write enforceable contracts to keep other members in line, which is what they call a prisoner's dilemma. I did mention that OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, I did mention that OPEC is a cartel. And I did mention previously that Saudi Arabia is the largest member out of 13 members of OPEC. And I also just mentioned that Saudi Arabia finds that cartels are illegal. However, OPEC is often described as a legal cartel, interestingly, because it coordinates oil production among member states. It operates at a state level and not as a private firm, therefore treated differently under international law. Let's have a look at an example of a cartel game. Do we price cut or do we not price cut? Clearly, if you were in a cartel, you will be not price cut. That's what a cartel would have done. A cartel would like everyone to focus on this strategy profile where nobody is cutting prices. A cartel agreement aims to keep profits high and therefore no price cut. A cartel would nudge all the other participants to not to price cut, and all of them will therefore enjoy higher surplus. Okay. Now, we then talk about the surplus of the cartel. 200, profit for all. But this is not what is good for the economy. This is not what is good for society. Consumers in particular, it's very bad when there are cartels or there's price setting happening. Society likes competition. Society likes low prices. And therefore, being able to control price like this would not be socially optimal. Let me remind you, a situation is socially optimal when marginal benefit equals marginal cost, total surplus is maximized, and outcome is Pareto efficient, meaning no further gains can be made without harming someone else. However, let's look at the dominant strategy. If for firm A, we're going to set it as price cut. For firm B, we look at 150 and 100, and 150 is greater than 100, and therefore we're going to price cut. On the other hand, if we set it as no price cut? Firm B, I think that was 300 and 200. Clearly 300 is greater than 200, so price cut. If we then look at firm B cutting prices, firm A cutting prices will give them 150 million. Firm B not cutting prices will give them 100, and therefore price cut is a strategy. If firm B do not price cut and firm A price cuts, they get 300 million. And if they do not price cut, they get 200 million. And therefore, they will price cut. So we can see here that price cut is both their dominant strategy. This is the optimal choice for firm A and firm B. This is a prisoner dilemma type of game where they both end up in equilibrium, preferring to price cut because that is their dominant strategy. This is very similar to the previous advertising example, where it is better for both companies not to advertise, but there's always the temptation to advertise instead and steal customers from your competitors. So therefore, the dominant strategy is to price cut for the same reason. Cartels are not very capable of handling situations like this because they cannot write enforceable contracts. Therefore, it's really hard for them to force their members to select no price cut. This is a dilemma that the cartel faces, but it is good for society because society likes firms to compete and to lower prices. Society likes it that cartels are not stable. So this is really, really important. The next game theory that we're going to talk about are coordination games. Coordination games are a type of games that capture those situations where the players benefit from coordinating their decisions. For example, we talk about the battle of the sexes. This is a game in which players differ over which activity they would prefer to engage in, but they still prefer engaging in the same activity over going alone. Let's have a look at this example. Okay. Now, imagine there are two partners. Doesn't bother me if you can think boy, girl, boy, girl, girl, two partners. Okay. Let's say partner A and partner B. They either want to go to the theater to watch a show or go to the stadium to watch sport. They want to spend time together, but they prefer different activities. A and B want to go on a date. They would like to coordinate and go together because you can see if they can go to the theater, they have fun. So they have a utility of 20 for A and 10 for B if they both go to the theater. Because they're together. That's what they want to do. If they go to the stadium, this person here has less fun. But it's still a positive utility. And the other person has even more fun with 15. So if they go to the stadium, somebody has less fun, but they're still happy because they're still together. They're happy because they're at the same place together on a date. They both value being together more than going alone, but each of them actually have a different preferred event. Now, being at different places is no good for these partners because each of them will have zero utility and vice versa. They want to be together. They want to spend time together. They want to be in each other's company. Therefore, coordination will give them the most payoff. Hence, this is a simultaneous game. Now, we're going to look at the payoff scenario. Okay. If player A goes to the theater, what is the optimal choice for player B? 10 or 0? 10 greater than 0. So we go to the theater. Well, you're better off than going to the stadium, or you'll be very lonely. If player A, on the other hand, goes to the stadium, the optimal choice for player B is 15 and 0. 15 greater than 0. And so we choose going to the stadium. Here you can see that there's no dominant strategy because there is no strategy that's always optimal for a player irrespective of what the other person does. Now, it makes sense because the objective here is to coordinate. Therefore, it is really important to know what the other person is doing if you want to go on a date. Sort of obvious, maybe. If I want to go on a date with you, I need to know what you're doing. Hi, I want to go on a date. I want to go to the movies. You want to come? Oh, no. I prefer to go and watch football that night. And you're like, okay. I'll go watch football with you because I want to be with you. I might not have the same amount of happiness or same amount of utils, but I'd rather be with you than be on my own. And so that's how it works for people going on a date. Now, so if player B then goes to the theater, player A can either choose to go to the theater or to go to the stadium. And player A goes to the theater. If we then look at player B going to the stadium, then player A will have 2 and 0, and 2 is greater than 0, so that says stadium. So see how the four scenarios, the 4 quadrants that we're looking at has 4 different outcomes. So there is no dominant strategy for player A, and there's no dominant strategy for player B. Now, that seems really, really terrible. In a situation like this, what you should do is to check each strategy. So let's go to check the strategy that we're talking about. You will look at each strategy profile. This is a strategy profile. This is a strategy profile. These are strategy profiles. There are a set of strategies, one for each player. Therefore, what we're looking for in these types of games is a strategy profile where no player has the incentive to deviate from their current strategy. Suppose that your current strategy is for both of them to go to the stadium. This is the current strategy that we're focusing on. Is there an incentive for any of the players to deviate from this unilaterally? If player B does, and this is player B, if player B does, they'll move from going to the stadium to going to the theater. Instead of getting 15 utils, you got 0. Not a good strategy for player B. So player B does not want to change their mind. If they start from this strategy profile, does player A want to deviate unilaterally? Move from going to the stadium to going to the theater? We're talking about that too here. Going to the stadium or going to the theater. This is also not a good deviation for player A either, because 2 is greater than 0. So this is not a good deviation. No player wants to unilaterally move away from a strategy profile. We call this a Nash equilibrium. For your exams, you need to check all the other strategy profiles. If you end up with, so in this instance, when there isn't a dominant strategy, you need to make sure you check all your strategy profiles. The question that you're asking is there an optimal deviation for player A? If the answer is yes, player A would prefer to go to the theater instead of going to the stadium to meet player B, because player A is definitely thinking of moving from stadium to theater to improve their payoff. This is not Nash equilibrium because of exactly what I just said. Player A is definitely thinking of moving from stadium to theater to improve their payoff. So both players here have an incentive to change their strategy. Player here, player A does not want to move to the stadium. They don't want to lose 20 utils for 0. And player B does not want to move from theater to stadium, because then they're losing 10 utils and getting 0. So because they are not going to deviate, they are at Nash equilibrium. Now, this is very important as to how Nash equilibrium works. If you cannot find a dominant strategy, you have to check each strategy profile, check each quadrant to see if there's a profitable deviation for one of the players. If there is, then it is not Nash equilibrium. So in this scenario, this is a scenario where there are two Nash equilibrium. Therefore, we're not quite sure which one is going to be played. How do we determine? It's an empirical question, meaning that it's based on concerned with or verified by observation or experience rather than theory and pure logic. Now, if you played this game in the computer labs repeatedly, like what economists have done in the past, sometimes you get 210 being played. Sometimes you get 215 being played. Well, we don't really know. Okay. This is something that we talk about as an empirical question. Now, there are ways to narrow it down though. Because if we look at the situation here, 20 and 10 are more equally distributed. But on top of it, their total payoff is 30. 2/15, there's more of a divergence of opinion because of the payoffs. But here, the total payoff is 30 versus here, the total payoff is 17. Now, economists would therefore say that 20, 10 is the more focal equilibrium. FOCAL. That is called focal equilibrium. A focal equilibrium is an equilibrium that players select by default when multiple equilibria exist. A focal equilibrium is a type of solution in a coordination game where players naturally gravitate towards one specific outcome, not because it's mathematically superior, but because it stands out as most obvious or the salient choice. Okay, so we can't be certain when there are two of these Nash equilibrium, and so this is kind of like an open question. Now, I just want to very, very, very quickly talk about Nash, only because we haven't really spent that much time looking at what Nash equilibrium is, defining Nash equilibrium. So I'm going to do that for you. A Nash equilibrium is a situation in a game theory where no player can improve their outcome by changing their strategy, as long as the other players keep theirs unchanged. What this represents is a stable state where everyone is doing the best they can given what others are doing. The concept here is that every player chooses a strategy that maximizes their payoff, assuming other strategies are fixed. There's no incentive to deviate. If all the players are at Nash equilibrium, no one can benefit by changing their own strategy alone. 3 examples of Nash equilibrium. We use Nash equilibrium in Prisoner's Dilemma, where you have 2 suspects to choose whether to confess or to stay silent. Both will confess, even though mutual silence would yield a better outcome, because they're both scared that the other is going to betray them. Battle of the Texas. One prefers theater, the other prefers stadium, but both want to be together. 2 Nash equilibrium. Theater, theater, stadium, stadium. Each player prefers a different one, but both are stable. Now, the last part, which is the most important. Why did we talk about all these game theory? Because of pricing in oligopoly. Competing firms set prices, and Nash equilibrium occurs when no firm can increase profit by changing its price alone, given competitors' prices. Therefore, in game theory, equilibrium means balance. Each player's strategy is optimal given the strategy of others. No one has an incentive to change their choice unilaterally. It is also a self-reinforcing outcome. Once it's reached, players tend to stay there unless there are external conditions. So basically, in strategic games, Nash equilibrium is where individual rationality leads to a collective strategy, or collective stability, sorry. Okay, we have finished chapter 8. Okay, we're going to go through a little bit of that in our recap next week, but I went quite slowly, hoping that that would be a good outcome. Now, I want to talk about chapter 9, a little bit about chapter 9. Sorry, trying to find my mouse on this other screen. Now, remember earlier we talked about imperfectly competitive markets. We said that if you breach any one of those rules, then what happens is that you're not going to be perfect competition anymore. We also talked about how imperfect markets are not price takers. We also talked about having existence of barriers to entry and exit, whether it's government imposed or otherwise. We talked about the fact that goods are not homogeneous in an imperfect market. But what we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at, and next week, are externalities. Now, when we look at imperfect markets, we talk about externalities. And for this particular chapter, we're going to start by introducing Maya. We're going to talk about positive consumption externality. Let's meet Maya. Maya likes perfume. And Maya is now deciding how much perfume to put on herself. How much perfume should Maya wear? Maya is an economist. She's going to now use the cost-benefit principle to compare the marginal cost of putting on perfume, which realistically is the cost of purchasing the perfume, versus the marginal benefit that they get from the additional unit of the perfume. That is how much I like the perfume on me. Maya is putting on perfume, and that is an individual decision. But she is having an external effect on Benji. Benji is sitting next to Maya and loves Maya's perfume. Therefore, if you want to maximize social surplus, that is the total benefit of both Maya and Benji, then the cost-benefit analysis should be more about the company with the marginal cost and the marginal benefit of both Maya and Benji, which is this. This is an example of positive consumption theory. I thought that it is interesting to note that not everybody loves others wearing perfume. I have a neighbor in my building that I know exactly who he is, because if I'm in the lift with him, oh my God, he has way too much perfume on him. And even if he's not in the lift, I would have known that he's been in the lift, because he sprayed so much perfume that instead of me loving it, it becomes slightly offensive. There is actually a state in Canada, Nova Scotia, where they have comprehensive fragrance-free policies in hospital, schools, and public offices, because there are people who do not like the smell. So interesting, isn't it? Examples of positive consumption externality. An example of positive consumption externality is, for example, you go to the gym, you get in shape, and now that you're healthy, the costs of your healthcare costs decrease. Or you choose to ride a bike to uni rather than, take a car. And in doing so, you reduce pollution and reduce congestion on the streets around the university. It's terrible driving a car. Or if you decide to go and get a flu vaccination, you protect yourself from the flu. But you are also protecting Benji, who's sitting next to you in class. Therefore, there are really important things that we do that have a marginal external benefit for society when we engage with them. Positive consumption externalities represent a benefit accrued to someone who is not involved in the consumption of a given good. So in this case, Benji has nothing to do with the consumption. Benji didn't spray perfume. Maya sprays perfume. But he is still affected by the perfume that Maya has put on herself. In this case, the effect was a good one because Benji liked it. This is at the core of a lot of things we see in the real world, like climate change, vaccinations, and these are all very important topics that we discuss, or it's in the news, being discussed all the time. Now, hopefully I can finish the next bit in 10 minutes. Now, we are going to look at positive consumption externality in terms of a graph. Now, if we look at the interpretation of this step graph, it's very, very similar to what we talked about in previous units when we look at demand and supply. We're going to look at the two types of interpretation, the vertical interpretation and the horizontal interpretation. Firstly, we're going to set the price at 8. Let's say, hypothetical. As the price is at 8, we move up. Move. And now at price 8, Mia will consume 4 units of perfume at the price at $8. Now, if we look at it from a different point of view, and we say, okay, we're going to start at the quantity. So at the 4th unit, the reservation price is at $8. So at the 4th unit, the reservation price is at $8. Therefore, the marginal benefit of consuming the 4th unit of perfume. Now, let's look at this from a slightly different perspective. Let's say that your market price is $8. Okay? We know that your external marginal benefit is $2. We can see that here. Okay? Your marginal external benefit is $2. Your market price is $8. At $8, Maya is going to demand 4 units. But at $8, we not only need to take into account Maya, we need to take into account Benji. And so we look at not just the private demand curve, and can you add 2 more bits to this graph? Sorry. I don't know why it's not allowing me to do that. So the reason why I want you to put those 2 red lines above is because for every single blue line, there is a red line that follows, because the red line is the distance between the marginal external benefit, which is 2. So it has to move up by 2 units. Okay, or by $2, sorry. Right? So if we see a downward sloping demand curve, then basically this is a marginal external benefit, which is $2. And so we increase it by that amount. Social demand curve. Okay. Why is externalities creating a complication in the market? Because in a perfectly competitive market where the price is $8, it would indicate that the quantity demanded is $4. 4 units, sorry. I'm very, very tired. I keep saying the wrong thing, sorry. It's 4 units, and that is the optimal quantity. What is the optimal quantity if we also consider that Benji is benefiting from Maya's putting on some perfume? So we start from the same market price. So that market price here of 8, we start at that same market price. And we're going to go to your marginal benefit, marginal external benefit, and there you go. We start from the same point. We continue past Maya's demand curve until we touch the social demand curve, which also includes Benji's marginal benefit. So the optimal quantity for society is 6 units. Not the optimal quantity for Maya individual. At this 6 units, this should not be too surprising because from the perspective of society, we also consider Benji's benefit. And therefore, Maya, by thinking about herself only, she decided to consume 4 units of perfume. And that is what society would like, because society would like to also consider Benji's benefit. Therefore, when you go to the gym and decrease healthcare costs later in life, we end up saving some taxes for people into the future. This means that there is an external benefit from your action that you are not internalizing. Maybe society will like you to do more exercise because that's really good for everyone, not just you. And this is a situation where Maya, by doing the best for herself, is not achieving the socially optimal quantity because they're not considering the external benefit of the actions. I am actually going to stop here for today only because I stopped at this exact same point in the live lecture this week. I want you to have a quick look before the next lecture of the rest of chapter 9, because next week is the last week. I don't want to be delivering the content to you without you at least skimming through the content. So, you know, hopefully we will be able to finish. I'm hoping that we will finish. And for the very, very last lecture next Thursday, I will get Alberto either at the beginning or at the end to come, and the both of us will talk to you a little bit about the exams. Okay? Anybody has questions? I'm not seeing my course marks in play economics. Chun Thorensai? Is that how you say your name? I'm sorry, but if you could send us an email, send me the email, CC Alberto into it, or send Alberto and myself the email telling us that you can't see your course marks. We will try and sort it out for you. So if you could do that, that will be great. Rob As is externality section of Play Economics open? I haven't checked it yet, so I'm not 100% certain. Trend seems to think that it's not open yet, so I'm inclined to believe Trend. Thank you, Trent, for being supportive today. There were a lot of questions. I'm trying to just scan through anything that I need to answer, but I think Trent has answered them all very, very well. So I'm going to hang around for another couple of minutes. But if you have no questions, I'm happy for you to leave the session. If you have any other questions that you would like to ask, please put that in the chat. Anything technical to do with Play Economics, please email us because I can't actually do that whilst I'm on the live session with you. So we'll have to take that offline and we will investigate it for you. Okay. Doesn't look like there are any more questions coming through. Thank you very much again for today. I'm hoping that I haven't gone too fast because I'm desperately trying to make sure that you understand, because the topic of monopoly and the topic of oligopoly is really, really, really important in your final exam. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being patient with me and to listen to me ramble on and on, especially today. I'm really sleep deprived. So I was up doing something completely random. But if you need anything, we are just an email away. Make sure you reach out, especially since next week is your last week of lectures. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend ahead. I will see you all on Tuesday. Bye. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Manisha. Bye.